Okay, welcome everybody. Let's go through a little bit about the nutrition for week one and really the overall nutrition program. So even though we're in week one now, I kind of want to give you an introduction to nutrition specifically for women. And this is going to be very different than what you may have learned in the past regarding calories. This is really all about hormones. So let's talk about that a minute. The first thing you need to understand about women in particular is that estrogen is a big factor in the way that you respond to food. So you might say, well, Jade, why is that? The reason that's the case is because with estrogen, what happens is when you have enough estrogen in your body and your body is responding well to estrogen, estrogen is really an anti-insulin factor. So for some of you who are new to metabolic effect and the concepts of metabolic effect, one of the things you need to understand is that just because you are losing weight does not mean you are burning fat. In a lot of cases, you may actually be losing water or muscle, which makes your metabolism much more inefficient in the long run. And insulin is the major hormone responsible for your ability to burn fat because it's the major fat storing hormone, and it also keeps us from burning fat. So estrogen has a direct impact on insulin. Now, the other thing that has a very strong impact on insulin is stress. So stress, and particularly the hormone cortisol, is very important for women as well, because you may not be eating a whole lot of calories and you may not be eating a whole lot of carbohydrates and things like that, but you can be getting into issues with insulin because of the stress hormone cortisol. So cortisol stimulates insulin resistance, meaning that you have to generate higher and higher amounts of insulin to make your metabolism respond appropriately because of stress and cortisol, which makes you store fat more readily and quickly. And then progesterone is the other piece here that you need to be aware of that's unique to women. Progesterone is an anti-cortisol hormone. And so is estrogen, by the way, an anti-cortisol hormone. And let me just grab my eraser here because I was going to say plus, but what I want to say here is minus. This is a minus cortisol hormone. And so is estrogen, actually. So estrogen is both minus insulin or impedes insulin and cortisol. So you can see right away that there are two ways that you can store fat. One is by eating your way into getting fat. The other is by stressing your way to getting fat. And that estrogen and progesterone together balance those two things out. And so one of the huge mistakes that a lot of women make is they pay attention to calories and not carbs. And that is a mistake, because when you focus on calories only and you don't focus on carbohydrates, you cannot take advantage of the estrogen and progesterone. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this is even true for menopausal women in just a minute. So for those of you who are dealing with perimenopause, menopause, or postmenopause, this story is really important for you as well. But as soon as you are eating all these whole grains and lots of grain products like your doctor and nutritionist has probably told you to do, what's happened is you're not adequately controlling insulin. So insulin goes up and up and up, and you're not having the advantage of estrogen and progesterone. As soon as you begin to control carbs, you have some of the fat burning potential of estrogen and progesterone working for you. So that's one of the key things that you're going to learn in this program about women, that carbs are more important than calories as far as most women are concerned, and it really begins to play a huge role when you start thinking about menopause. So let's talk about menopause for just a minute. What happens in menopause? Well, a few things happen in menopause, and what I want to do is kind of get some different colors here so you can kind of see on the board what happens. Let's say this is prior to menopause, right? So before menopause and after menopause. Now, let's use red to talk about estrogen. So before menopause, let's say you have this much estrogen, okay? And you have this much progesterone. And you're able to burn fat fairly well so long as you control carbs. So your fat burning is in check, right? You're able to burn fat so long as you control carbs. Now remember, if you're overeating carbs as a woman, that's more detrimental to you than overeating calories. Now, after menopause, here's what happens. Estrogen decreases. You still do make some in your fat cells, but your ovaries no longer secrete it anymore. And progesterone decreases. Your adrenal glands will secrete or produce estrogen, or progesterone rather. But look what happens here. So they both fell, but the gap between estrogen and progesterone is wider here. So not only do you have lower estrogen and progesterone here, but you have a estrogen relative excess compared to progesterone, so a progesterone deficiency. Essentially what that means is now all of a sudden hormones that were working for you to make you more carb sensitive, to make you tolerate carbohydrates better, and to help you balance your stress better, now they are much lower and not as impactful. And so the amount of carbohydrates that you could get away with eating before now becomes a huge problem for you. So not only do women in general need to watch and control carbohydrates, perhaps more than men do, and they do that because they can use estrogen and progesterone to help them along. Once you get to menopause, it becomes even more important to control the carbohydrate intake. So let me show you one more thing before we finish up this basic introduction. And I know it's a lot of chemistry, and for those of you who are not used to this, it's fine. You're going to get these themes repeated over and over and over again in this course. But here's the one thing that I want to show you for those of you who are a little bit confused about calories and carbohydrates. When estrogen and progesterone are working for you, calories in a low calorie diet is pretty much a low carbohydrate diet. And here's why. Let's say that you're eating this many calories per day, right? And of that, most people are going to eat from 40%, 50%, up to 70% of their calories as carbohydrates. And so most people, most of this calorie intake is going to be carbohydrate intake in the form of starch, right? Now, when you lower calories, so if we're going to lower calories, what happens is we automatically lower carbs as well, right? So in other words, there's less carbs here than there is here because we lowered calories, and carbs must necessarily lower with calories. Now, the interesting thing is that this amount of carbohydrate at this calorie level may keep you from burning fat, but this amount may lead to fat loss. And this is why diets such as Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers and things like that work for women, some women, when they're younger. But then when they go through menopause, so now we go through menopause, now what happens is you lose the influence of estrogen and progesterone, and the amount of carbohydrates that cause fat storage drops tremendously. So if you continue eating this way, you're not going to get the same results as you once did. What you need to begin to do is leave the calories the same, because you can only go so low in calories before you start getting insatiable hunger, cravings, and energy levels. So the next thing to do is to focus on carbs in particular. So not just calories, but carbs. And so what happens is the calories stay the same by eating more protein, more fiber, more fat, but the carbohydrates get controlled, and now your fat loss is turned on. This is an introduction to what is so important about hormones. The final thing we'll say here is that this insulin effect, any effect that estrogen and progesterone have on helping you or hurting you burn fat, is wiped out when insulin and carbs are high. And so the first thing you need to understand is how to control carbohydrates. And that's what we're going to talk about as we move forward. But the first thing to understand is that as a female, this is something that you probably won't hear anywhere else. Carbohydrates are probably the most important macronutrient for you to pay attention to. Not fat, but carbs.